Yo, what is up everyone? James back here, and yeah, this is way overdue, I know, but I finally got some time to go over the teams and what I think currently is going to be good in the metagame currently. So we're going to start off with the month of April. We had the first event, which was the Columbia Open, which happened on April 8th, and you can see the top cut teams pretty much. What I've noticed about spring regionals and spring events in general during circuits is that people don't tend to just create something new. They just tend to go with stuff that they are very comfortable with. So most likely you're going to just be seeing a lot of standard teams or maybe a twist off of standard, but you're not really going to see anything really too native. People are just going to use what's comfortable with them. Like if a player is comfortable with Trick Room, they're going to try to make a Trick Room team. There really isn't much innovation that happens in spring, so it's just basically what most players are currently using, because there are quite a few things that a lot of people are using broken down the categories, but we're going to look over every top cut team. So first was Freddy, and pretty much what I noticed is a Lurantis in third place, which was pretty interesting. Lurantis getting contrary ability, not really doing much, I think, other than Leaf Storm. I mean, it is a grass type with, you know, decent special attack, especially with Leaf Storm contrary boosting it, but not sure what it really accomplished. It looked like just a version of Gamma Michael's team, except with a Lurantis, which was interesting. A lot of Tapu Koko, a lot of Arcanine, Double Water, which was pretty interesting from Lewis, and you see stuff that people have been using in the format a lot. You know, just like Pokemon that are very common: Arcanine, Garchomp, Kartana, Celesteela, Porygon 2. Pretty much just staple on everything. Now let's move on to the Salt Lake City Regional Championship. I am going over pretty fast, however I do want this to be decently brief, and the fact we have a lot of regionals to come and analyze. So we have Salt Lake Regionals, which happened April 8th to April 9th. We see the teams. We have a rain team that actually won first, except very interesting, it had Bandit Arcanine, which was pretty interesting, and I believe it was Choice Locked Tapu Lele if I am correct. And then we see Ninetales. Ninetales has actually been coming up more in usage lately in top cut events. Like, Ninetales is a Pokemon that we don't really see much, but as you'll see as we progress through events, that Ninetales has actually been doing pretty well. So we have a Ninetales, and Marowak's actually coming back too. I think people are realizing how good Lightning Rod is and how good Tapu Koko is, because a lot of the top cut teams, as you're going to see throughout the events, have Tapu Koko, and Tapu Koko is just a fantastic mon. It's, you know, super fast. It's just able to outspeed a lot of the Pokemon in the format. So having a check to Tapu Koko in the fact of Lightning Rod is pretty nice, because the main damaging output that Tapu Koko is going to have is that Thunderbolt, and you really can't do much, which is why Pokemon such as Marowak and Togedemaru are decently common now. And then we just see, you know, a bunch of standard Pokemon once again. We actually do see a Togedemaru in 6th place. We see an interesting team that featured Trevenant's Double Duck, which was pretty interesting. Buzzwole was also a Pokemon that I want to talk about. We're going to be seeing a lot more Buzzwole in the future top cuts, but Buzzwole is a Pokemon that's been coming back. I think Buzzwole is probably the best Pokemon on rain teams. Like, Buzzwole is so good on rain because, one, you get rid of the Arcanine damage output with the rain. The fact that it just hits so hard. Buzzwole hits really hard and can take a lot of hits. I think Buzzwole is just very solid on rain in general, yet not sure how good it is outside of rain. But as you see, we just see a lot of the standards. We see all the Tapus except Tapu Bulu, Garchomp, Arcanine, Gyarados, Kartana, Koko. It's just everyone's using something solid. As we're going to move on to Korean Spring League right here, which was the, I believe a league is different from, I think the league is similar to an open. So here we have first place. We actually see top 16 since it was a top 16 cut. I think this had over 300 players, but I'm not exactly sure yet. As you can see, this is something that you're going to be seeing a lot of during spring. Fake PG. So what Fake PG is, it stands for Feeny, Arcanine, Kartana, Electric type, that's where the E comes in, and then Porygon 2 Gigalith. So that's basically fake PG. So it's actually funny because it's actually ordered in that way. But you're going to see a lot of fake PG. It's basically, you know, good old AFK, except it has a different acronym now. But Gigalith's really rising, which is something that is kind of interesting. Gigalith kind of rose in the beginning of the format, you know, it's pretty much used as a trick room setter. I feel like Gigalith is one of those Pokemon that just keeps rising back and forth. Like, it does well in certain events, and then it kind of dropped in usage kind of during the middle of the format, but now it's picking up usage again. So it's a pretty interesting Pokemon. We see like a version of Marcus's team, except it had Mimilax, which I actually do like. It's actually pretty common. I think I actually know the player because I have faced this team a lot on high-ranked Battle Spot ladder in the past, when I think it was actually around the time of Korean Spring League, so it might have been the same person. And then you just see, you know, you're just gonna see a lot of Arcanine, Tapu's, Kartana, Porygon 2s, Mimikyu, Snorlax is just a great combination in general. The fact you're able to use Psych Up, it's just so good that you are able to have a good Trick Room setter. The fact that Ghost type on Mimikyu, there are so many different Mimikyu sets you can run to pair up with Snorlax. Psych Up, for instance, Psych Up Trick Room, Z Destiny Bonds. There's actually a lot of cool sets that you can run. And then you see some interesting Pokemon, Nihilego. You actually see a Lycanroc here. A Silvally, which was featured, I believe, actually no, this was the exact same team from Japan if I remember correctly. Drifblim's actually still relevant. It's actually still doing pretty well at events. Even though people say that Drifblim isn't that great, it actually is still being consistently solid at events. Starmie made top 16. Not much I can really say about the results. I mean, it's pretty much the Pokemon that people are comfortable with. I mean, these are probably the top tier Pokemon in the whole entire metagame, so it makes sense that these Pokemon are being used, and you're just going to see pretty much the same Pokemon with different combinations. Maybe you'll see a bit of variety, but pretty much you're going to see them all on the teams that, you know, do well, because those Pokemon are most solid, especially paired together. So next we're going to talk about the Dima Open, or Dima Open. I don't know how this is pronounced. Yeah, the first place team was actually very interesting. It had a Braviary, which was, you know, Braviary is not a Pokemon that we commonly see. You know, Braviary is usually a Pokemon that always holds Z-move. It's got a great ability in Defiant, yet not really used just because probably Tapu Koko is very common. The fact Braviary isn't exactly the fastest Pokemon, so it doesn't guarantee a Tailwind. And the fact that it's decently slow, to say the least. Slow and a bit frail isn't the greatest combination, but the fact that Defiant is such a good ability, and the fact that it gets Tailwind, which is like most of the metagame speed control wise is Trick Room, it's very nice to have Braviary. And then, you know, Pheromosa, which is a Pokemon that I feel like right now, currently in June, a lot of people are hating on, but it's just a very solid Pokemon. The fact that it outspeeds so many Pokemon and it gets so many good coverage moves, has a hard hitting Z move that can OHKO a Pokemon if you're not careful on the first turn. And then there's like, yeah, like Pheromosa, it has a lot of coverage. It can hit Tapus. It can run that Poison Z set if it wants to knock out like a Tapu Lele. It outspeeds Tapu Lele. That's not timid. It's just a solid mon, and people have to be, you know, worried about this thing. Salazzle is also a interesting choice. The fact that it does have a fake out pressure, so it's a fast fake out user. Outspeeds Kartana, so you can get a flamethrower off. And Sage Kartana is heavily fallen at this point of the meta. Like April and May, like Focus Sash Kartana became a lot less used. You're usually seeing on fake PG, it's usually either Choice Scarf or Z moves, sometimes Assault Vest, but Assault Vest is also pretty low usage. It's usually between Z move and Scarf now. And then, you know, we actually see fake PG for second place. This third place person had a very interesting team as well, using Tapu Bulu, Seeking, Starmie, Miltank, Braviary, and Flareon. There is a pace bin about it, and the sets are extremely weird. It was Fighting Z, if I remember correctly, on Miltank as well. Shoma's a version of Shoma's team, except it has Gigalith for kind of like versions of Edu's team for 5th and 6th. Kind of standard for 7th and 8th. Mandibuzz is kind of being seen here, and Mandibuzz is a Pokemon that did drop in usage just because the fact that, you know, Gigalith is becoming more common. The fact that Mandibuzz really kind of struggles against Gigalith teams is kind of why the reason it's being dropped. Even though it's solid for Tailwind, the fact it's weak to 1 Lele, which was kind of rising in the format, it still gets hit by Moonblast pretty hard, even with the boosted from the seed. And also the fact that Gigalith just does so much damage to Mandibuzz with Rock Slide, since most of them are running especially defensive Mandibuzz. It's really hard for Mandibuzz to stay relevant right now. As we're going to move on to the Latin American International Championship, and oh boy, here we go. First place was Sun, actually. So Sun by Ashton Cox, piloted with Torkoal, Lilligant, Pheromosa, Tapu Lele, Mimikyu, and Snorlax, which is a very interesting team because one, you have Torkoal, Lilligant, which is a very strong lead, Pheromosa, Tapu Lele, which is a very strong lead, and then you have Mimikyu, Snorlax, which is a very hard lead, and also you have the option for Trick-Room with Torkoal and Snorlax, which makes it very hard to handle. So this team had so much potential, and the fact that it is so risky because you are risking a lot with sleep powders on this team most of the time, but you know what, it was worth it because a lot of players didn't exactly have the best Sun matchup at the time, because most people in the international will not actually prepare for Sun, because most people will opt away for Sun because of the fact it's inconsistent, especially with sleep powder. But the fact that it can do really well if, you know, they can land the sleep powders, it can do really well, and it's a scary team that you have to work for. So they're not exactly prepared for Sun. And then we see pretty much what we've been seeing. Fake PG, Marcus still using his same team, another fake PG. Basically we're just seeing, oh wait, no, wait, that's the only fake PG team. And Ian actually using, I don't remember who created this team first. It was him or Jamie Boyd, except Jamie Boyd, I believe, ran Cloyster over the Arcanine slot, if I am correct. But this team's pretty interesting. It focuses on Tail Glow Circuitry and the fact that it's very hyper offensive, and you use Smeargle as a support with Spore, Follow Me, Wide Guard to protect your kind of Pheromon. Circuitry is not exactly the bulkiest Pokemon. Nihilego is not exactly the bulkiest Pokemon on the physical side, as well as Pheromosa is just not bulky at all. And since he ran Scarf Lele, it was not really that bulky. We see kind of like a version of Wolf's team as well for 3rd place. With Physical Salamence, kind of re-edited, with Arcanine over Magnezone. Yeah, Arcanine over Magnezone, and it was a pretty interesting team if you ended up catching that stream, which you can still. But anyway, let's move on to the next team. For the last event of April, which happened in France, April 22nd to April 23rd, we had the Lion special event. So Drifblim, Tapu Lele actually did win this event, so Drifblim's, you know, still capable of winning events. And it's actually pretty interesting because we're actually seeing some points of kind of old ideas. We have Alex Gomez kind of bringing back kind of the Garchomp, Tapu Koko, Marowak, Gyarados, Celesteela core with Porygon 2. I mean, that was kind of a team that everyone in the beginning used in the format, so it was a pretty interesting team to see. Another Drifblim, Tapu Lele. Pretty much similar, pretty much the same Pokemon that we see, you know, expect. 1 Ninetales, and Milotic was actually something interesting to see. We haven't really seen much Milotic in the format, and Milotic, again, kind of the same thing with Braviary, except the fact with Milotic is that it actually is very scary when it gets that competitive boost, because instead of a +1 you're going to get with Braviary when intimidated, you're going to get a +2 special attack. So Milotic's going to be able to hit hard. The fact that it scares away Arcanine, which is a pretty common Pokemon in the format, but the reason it's not really used is, one, the fact its damage output isn't that great, 2, the fact that Tapu Koko, Kartana are still very common in the format, so it's very hard for Milotic to do a lot of work against those Pokemon, since it does get one shot by most of them without a item to help it, such as the Walking Berry. So that's the reason why. Anyway, that is it for the teams of April. We will be coming up with the teams from May starting now. Alright, we're going to kick things off with the Korean National Championship. So there are, I believe Korea and Japan are the only countries that actually get nationals this year, because they have a different qualifying circuit. They don't exactly have championship points. They only have, like, you get an invite if you do well at the national. So we have, basically you actually had to get top 8, I think, for that invite. Yeah, so we had a very interesting setup, I think, just in general. So we have the second place, I think, stands out the most, not the first place. The first place did have an interesting team. I mean, we see Hariyama, and I think Hariyama is still an underrated Pokemon. The fact that Hariyama is able to do so well, I think, against just, you know, fake PG if it's a Togedemaru variant, even with the Koko variant, like, Hariyama can still put in a lot of work. The fact that it hits Gigalith, Porygon 2 hard with close combat. Gigalith can't really do much unless it's the Z move, and especially if you're Solvest Hariyama, you're going to be taking hits pretty well. You kind of take a Moonblast from Feeny extremely well. The fact you can hit hard with Poison Jab, you have Knockoff, you have Bulldoze. There's a lot of options on Hariyama that it has, so I think Hariyama is a cool Pokemon. And then the second place, we had a very interesting team. It was, I mean, Murkrow, Tailwind, Quash, Prankster, so it's a very interesting Pokemon to deal with. I don't really remember much about the team. I do know it was Psychium Z Metagross, which is interesting with Tapu Lele, so it does hit really hard, and the fact you can't intimidate Metagross, that Shattered Psyche is going to do so much damage. And then we had a Sage actually using Eevee, a version of Geo's team that he got, which was interesting. Fake PG for Wansock. I'm not sure if I'm actually pronouncing that right. And then it's actually funny because Murkrow, Porygon Z, Marowak is actually top 8. I actually didn't know that. Till I just looked at these teams. A version of Marcus's team, kind of a hyper offensive team similar to Ian and Jamie Boyd, and then pretty much a lot of the same mons, a lot of fake PG, it looks like. Ninetales, a few Ninetales actually. Ninetales has a decent usage here. I believe it had like 20% maybe of teams. And yeah, I think that's all I have to pretty much say. It's Pokemon that you pretty much commonly see. The Vanillux was pretty interesting. Vanillux has kind of dropped down in usage because of the fact that Gigalith's rising, and the fact that the Garchomp usage has really been dropping as well. So not in this event because there are actually quite a few Garchomps, but Garchomp has declined compared to the previous couple of months. The fact that people don't really think that Garchomp's that great, the fact that Porygon 2 is just such a common Pokemon in this format that it's really hard for Garchomp to set up properly if it's like against the Porygon 2 that just sets up Trick Room. And the fact that there are some things like Tapu Fini that can kind of wall Garchomp, the Koko that might carry Twinkle Tackle or just do a lot of damage to Garchomp. Yeah, it's just a hard Pokemon to utilize in general. But let's move on to the Malaysia Regional Championship, which happened May 6th to 7th. The top 8 teams, I mean, again, Drifblim won, but this time it was actually paired with Feeny, which was a pretty interesting set, and had Porygon 2 Snorlax. I don't know if this was Belly Drums and a Psycho Porygon 2. I would kind of assume so. We see Mudsdale and Muck and Xurkitree actually for an interesting combo, and I do want to talk about Muck and Mudsdale because I feel like they're Pokemon that just have so much potential right now. There are a lot of teams that are weak to Mudsdale and Muck. The fact that Muck can handle the Tapus, as I said earlier, I feel like Muck is like one of those Pokemon like Gigalith that have been dropping and rising in usage. The fact, depending on how common those Pokemon are. But with the drop of Garchomp, I feel like Muk is just very solid in general right now. So I think Muk's a very good call currently. And Mudsdale, I think, with like Porygon 2 and Gigalith being common, and the fact that Solvest Mudsdale can easily take an Ice Beam from Porygon 2, I feel like Mudsdale is a very solid Pokemon to run currently, especially since it does a lot to Arcanine if it wants to switch into Intimidate. High horsepower is still going to do a lot, so I think it has a lot of potential. And then we see like a Caracosta, Hariyama Gengar, which is pretty interesting. Gengar, a Pokemon you don't really see as much. I feel like you either see Sash, maybe a Trick Room variant, just to catch people off guard, or you might see Scarf just to outspeed Tapu's. Koko Raichu, which is pretty interesting. Whimsicott, which is a Pokemon that you really don't see too much, except Whimsicott still has some niche roles. The fact it can run Tailwind, Encore, Taunt, the fact it's a great support Pokemon. Moonblast, it gets a priority Nature's Power if you really want to go that route. It outspeeds Kartana and has Hidden Power, Fire if you want to pick up the knockout, which is something that Tristan Medina in our area has been doing recently. And yeah, just fake PGs, kind of standard stuff. Now let's move on to Virginia Regional Championship, which I did play, but unfortunately not making this top 8. We have Nick Naviar, Nails OU, with this very interesting team that he had. It was Double Grass, I think he called it, with Tapu Bulu, Kartana, Arcanine, Salamence, Clefairy, and Snorlax. Now, when you look at this team, it looks strange to me. It just looks strange. But the fact that he had Toxic Salamence, Toxic Arcanine, Curselax, and I think it's just standard Clefairy, I think it had Heal Pulse, was just very interesting. To be honest, I thought this was a Dragon Dance, Swords Dance, Belly Drum setup, but it was just a really hard stall team actually, which was pretty interesting, especially since I think Tapu Bulu can be decent, because a lot of actually Kartana's kind of dropped using Smart Strike. They kind of started going like a Swords Dance or Substitute variant over Smart Strike, because Tapu Bulu can't really touch Kartana anyway. But the fact that I think Tapu Bulu can do well, especially if it can get a pretty powerful Wood Hammer Z move off, it can do a lot of damage. A Robert Moore with fake PG, except he had AV Coco, if I remember correctly. And then this team, Toller Webb's team, is actually a team that's really, you're going to see a lot of later, but I think it's very solid. Bulky Specs Coco, standard Arcanine Celesteela, Swords Dance Shelly Garchomp, Aurora Veil Ninetales with Roar, I believe, and it was Belly Drum Snorlax. And then yeah, pretty much the same things you've been pretty much expecting. Another Whimsicott, as well as Circuitry, and a lot of fake PG, and a lot of Coco, Celesteela, Garchomp cores. So pretty much what we've been seeing a lot of recently. I feel like these teams have basically been dominant. I mean, we have pretty much standard AFK from the beginning of the format, and then we have standard Fantasy core, and then we're just seeing like Pokemon being, you know, common Pokemon just being paired with like Tapu Koko is a very common Pokemon, and it makes sense on that core. Fast Volt Switch, and then Arcanine makes sense on this core because this core can kind of lose to Celesteela, and the fact that Intimidate's so good. So next, let's go to the Treviso Open, which happened in Italy the same time during Virginia Regionals. We have Luca winning with Drifblim Lele, so Drifblim Lele still winning events. Eevee getting second. Eric Rios with the Gastrodon on, you know, something similar to Edu's team in the past. Fake PG, pretty much standard stuff. Ninetales Muck, which I think the combo is just solid in general, but Garchomp's not really as common still. Garchomp, there are 3 Garchomps, but really you're just gonna see a lot of teams without Garchomp, as you will see. Toronto, let's move on to Toronto because there's not really much to say about the Open. We have Toller Webb's team again, but this time taking first place. Joshua Lorsi actually using a Xurkitree with Hariyama, and it was a pretty cool set. It had Bulldoze Hariyama with Feints, with Xurkitree setup so you could Tail Glow with Fake Out support. Calm Mind Feeny, the fact that you could use Hariyama to help set up either SD Garchomp, the Tail Glow, or the Calm Mind, and then Bolos for speed control, so your setup Pokemon is just able to do a lot of work, outspeed your opponent's Pokemon and pick up KOs. Ian with pretty much the same team, except he changed the Arcanine to Celesteela. Not much I have to say about Fake PG. Kind of a version of Tommy's team of Rain from Internets, except Kartana over Porygon 2, which I think could actually do really well coming up in the previous weekends. And Tristan Medine with a very interesting team: Hidden Power Fire Coco, Hidden Power Fire Life Orb Whimsicott, Scarfanellux, I believe it was Scarfanellux, Mimilax, and really bulky Garchomp. And that's pretty much all I have to really say, other than the Machamp, I guess, because this Machamp, very powerful. Scope Lens, Cross Chop, No Guard. The fact you can, a critical hit Machamp, that's basically all I would say. I mean, you get to knock out Porygon 2, which is interesting, but yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about Toronto. Let's move on to the Milan special event. That happened on May 21st, and Eric Rios with his same team did win this event with, you know, kind of a similar team. Actually, no, this isn't so similar. Wow, Gigalith Ninetales on the same team. Fake PG, Drifblim Lele, more Fake PG. I don't know what this team is. Smeargle's interesting on, yeah, Smeargle's just interesting on this team, except unfortunately that player was actually removed due to hack check. Would have been interesting to know more about that team, but pretty much stuff you would pretty much assume. I mean, Garchomp's still decently common, as you see in the top cuts, but in usage-wise, generally, it's just dropped a lot, but it's still pretty good of a Pokemon. And then finally, our last event is Seattle, Washington, with Justin Burns taking it home with a similar version to Fake PG, except it had Nihilego over the Electric type, which helped coverage a bit. I mean, it did make the team a bit weaker to Celesteela, which kind of was a Pokemon that was really hard for this team to handle. Hayden McTavish bring a Manabuzz Marowak Tapu Fini core with, you know, pretty much standard. Good. Conan's still been pretty much running the same thing since his last regional championship, except Porygon 2 over Mimikyu this time. Fantasy core, Drifblim, Tapu Lele, Fake PG. An interesting take on Drifblim Lele, except it has Xurkitree, which is pretty interesting because Tail Glow Xurkitree on Tailwind, I guess does make sense. Same team as Conan, and Drifblim Lele with Gashadon, which is kind of interesting, which I'm actually kind of questioning, but not much. But those are the top cut teams. I did go by pretty fast, but pretty much just pointed out what was pretty much, you know, a bit standing out. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same Pokemon as you always see. And now I'm going to move on to my analysis on basically what I thought about what's going to happen currently. Alright, so I think the first thing I want to talk about is the big team that a lot of people I've been seeing recently, and this is Fake PG. So basically it's a version of AFK, except it usually carries an electric type. You're going to see Kartana, Arcanine, Tapu Fini, Porygon 2, and Gigalith, and then electric type, it's either Togedemaru usually or Tapu Koko, and sometimes you see maybe a filler like Nihilego or something. But I'm going to talk about this core and why it's so common. I think we all know the Fire Water Grass core is really good in the format. I mean, we kind of been proving that for the last 6 months basically. The fact that Tapu Fini, Arcanine, Kartana has already covered a lot of weaknesses that it has. The fact you can run so many different sets on these Pokemon. Like for instance, Kartana can run the Z move, could run Scope Lens, although Scope Lens is really dropped in usage. Z move, Scope Lens, there's Focus Ash, AV, Choice Scarf. I've seen Life Orb variants because you're able to pick up some KOs on like opposing Tapu Fini, and also you get to pick up the knockout on Coco, which is pretty nice. But yeah, it's just There are so many different sets you can run on these teams. Especially Sword Stance or Substitute. You could just run Smart Strike, obviously, if you want. There's Arcanine with, you Intimidate. You could run like a bunch of different sets. Bulky, obviously, physically or defensive. Physically or especially defensive. You could run an offensive set with Choice Band. You could run an Assault Vest variant. You could run one of the Misty Seeds, because that's actually been a thing. Misty Seed Thief. Yeah, you could run a Life Orb set, which isn't very common, but it's still doable. There's so many different Arcanines. The Arcanines are really cool Pokemon. It's just able to switch in a lot, and it really just supports the two Pokemon that it helps, Kartana and Tapu Fini. As Tapu Fini, so many different sets you can run. There's Tapunium Z with the Nature's Madness. You could run Choice Specs, Leftovers, a Guavaberry, a Calm Mind is something. Swagger Heal Pulse is another option. Nature's Madness, obviously, because Nature's Madness is a pretty good move. Just 4 attacks. There's actually the Specs Haze set, which is pretty common. And yeah, there's also Taunt as well. Taunt support. I've seen Soak a few times, but I don't think that's really as relevant. But yeah. And obviously Porygon 2 Gigalith is just a core that's been rising a lot. The fact that Gigalith covers a lot of weather options, because a lot of teams struggle against rain or sun. Gigalith's pretty good because it can switch into Torkoal pretty easily. Also, the fact that Gigalith can break sashes. It can switch into Ninetales and prevent Aurora Veil, which is pretty handy on this team. And Porygon 2, obviously, paired with the Gigalith, covers the Garchomp weakness with Ice Beam. Also has Thunderbolt if the team's weak to Gyarados. It just makes a lot of sense. Although they are both weak to Fighting type, you do have the Tapu Fini, which is the Fairy type to help cover. And then usually it's the Tapu Koko that is able to also help against Fighting types. But if you're running the Togedemaru set, you're running 4 Pokemon weak to Fighting type. So that is something I've been questioning. I just think it's too much. I don't think, even as Fighting type, there aren't that many good Fighting types other than Hariyama and Buzzwole. The fact that you have 4 weaknesses kind of hurts, especially if you're bringing 3 to a matchup. It just really, really hurts. So, the next thing I do want to talk about is this team, and you have seen a lot. Toller Webb's team designed. It's got the pretty much Dragon Steel Fairy core, the Fantasy core, and it's been a team that's actually been very popular recently. I think the reason is just the fact that these Pokemon are so good. The fact that Tapu Koko Garchomp's a very threatening lead. The fact that Garchomp and Celesteela is very good coverage because you can Earthquake next to yourself. The fact that Celesteela handles things like Tapu Lele, which might scare away this team. The fact that it helps against Porygon 2 with Leech Seed. And yeah, I just think this team is actually pretty solid. The fact that you have an SC Groundium Z Garchomp, so it helps against Gigalith. Celesteela is just a very solid Pokemon because it helps against Kartana. Tapu Koko, it was a bulky Volt Switch variant, so I do like that because it's just able to do a lot of damage in general. Ninetales, the fact that Ninetales is a Pokemon that, as I said, has been kind of actually rising in the top cut usage, yet it's kind of strange in the fact that Gigalith has been common everywhere. But the fact that is, this team, if you can get an Aurora Veil up with this team, Celesteela and Snorlax are pretty much impossible to KO. They will just eat up attacks. So if you can get an Aurora Veil up, it can just put in, these two Pokemon can put in so much work. And the fact that Ninetales has Aurora Veil, it scares out other Garchomps, which this team can be kind of scared of. It has Roar for Trick Room. It's just very, very, very interesting. And Snorlax with the Belly Drum set, I don't remember if it had Recycle. I'm not exactly sure, but I do remember they carried the Belly Drum set. And Arcanine, which makes the team more solid with Intimidate, helps against Kartana. But yeah, that's pretty much all I want to say about this team. I think this team has a lot of potential. It's just questionable about Ninetales in the format, where it's just, you know, again, Garchomp usage. Other than, you know, we've seen like 3 Garchomps in each of the top cut teams pretty much. But the fact that it's pretty much been dropping in usage in general lately, it's just questionable if Ninetales is worth keeping on the team. So we'll see if it can increase farther or not. Alright, so I'm gonna just talk about a few Pokemon that I've noticed have been pretty popular recently, and I'm gonna explain why they're probably so popular. So first off, we have Drifblim, and of course we've seen a lot of Drifblim Lele teams do well recently. The fact that it's still doing well, it's pretty much been a consistent mon that's actually been making top cut. But again, the reason why why Drifblim is so good is the fact that it gets an unburden ability with the seed, and the fact that the seed is able to boost its speed right away no matter what. You're always going to get that unburden boost first turn if you do lead with your Tapu, and the fact that Drifblim is a Pokemon that you pretty much get an automatic Tailwind up. It gets a lot of cool support moves. You know, it gets Clear Smog, it gets Destiny Bond, which helps it set up more Tailwinds in the future. Disable a Haze is pretty nice. It doesn't get knockoff in this gen, unfortunately. Obviously that priority Tailwind is the main reason, but it gets like Will-O-Wisp, Thunder Wave. It gets a pretty hard having Shadow Ball, and it has decent coverage moves, I guess, but mostly you're going to be using either Shadow Ball or Acrobatics, because those are pretty much the hardest hitting moves that it can get. So that's the reason why Drifblim's used. It's the fact that you're just having so much pressure with the fact that Drifblim is able to outspeed pretty much anything in the meta except maybe Raichu, for instance. Raichu and Lilligant, I believe those are the only 2 things that can outspeed Drifblim, other than maybe a very, very fast Choice Scarf Mon, like maybe Choice Scarf Tapu Koko or something. But the fact that those Pokemon have to be in their weather / terrain in order to outspeed Drifblim, and then Lilligant can only really Sleep Powder the Drifblim, and I guess Raichu can pick up the knockout. But usually, unless you get the terrain up with Tapu Koko, which is very unlikely if you lead like something like Drifblim, Tapu Lele, you're pretty much gonna be faster than Raichu, because they're not gonna get the terrain up unless you're like Scarf Lele, or the fact that their Tapu Koko is really slow. So Drifblim is just a reliable Pokemon. It can help set up. It can just, that Tailwind is just so valuable, and that's the reason why Drifblim is just really good right now. I think Drifblim actually still has a lot of unexplored potential, especially Drifblim, Tapu Lele, Garchomp. I feel like that is still very solid currently, but we'll see how it does in the future. We have Togedemaru up next, and a lot of people wonder, Togedemaru, that's a weird Pokemon. It doesn't even get a good steel coverage move, but the fact that the ability to Lightning Rod makes it really, really good. Obviously, common items are usually Air Balloon, Focus Sash, but I have seen some interesting sets such as a V instance or a Z move one, for instance. So why Togedemaru? Well, Togedemaru, of course, Lightning Rod is really good. It's actually one of the solid Pokemon that can handle Tapu Koko efficiently. The fact it can slow it down a lot with that Lightning Rod, and the fact it resists Dazzling Gleam, and not many Tapu Kokos run Hidden Power Ground anymore. That was more a thing in the beginning of the format when Magnezone was decently common, but now we don't really see Hidden Power Ground. So we have Togedemaru with a very high base speed of 96, which is actually pretty relevant because it outspeeds Tapu Lele and Arcanines by 1 point exactly. It's not exactly the bulkiest Pokemon. It does have a kind of decent attack stat for a support mon. The fact that its signature move Zing Zap is going to actually do a lot of damage, as Zing Zap is able to, yeah, here it is, 30% chance to flinch, 80 base power move. It actually does hurt a lot if it's not intimidated, so it actually does do a lot. And there are a lot of different options at Togedemaru. The main sellout point is Fake Out, which is kind of why you see it on like Fake PG, because it can help set up Trick Room very safely. Encore, which is pretty nice because it can lock your Pokemon into a setup move such as like Tailwind on an opposing Drifblim, or maybe a slow Garchomp that's running SD. You can Encore that. And then, you know, there's Nuzzle, which is an interesting option, which, you know, is decent, I guess, but that's not usually on Tapu Fini teams. We've seen Poison Jab sometimes because it can hit Tapu Bulu, and the fact that I've seen Poison Z on this Togedemaru Reflect is actually interesting. I never noticed it actually got Reflect. Spiky Shield, which is like a Protect, but contact moves, they lose 1/8 of their health, which is pretty nice. Thunder Wave, Volt Switch U-turn on those AV sets. But otherwise, yeah, Togedemaru, very interesting Pokemon. Not sure how good it is, to be honest. I've tested it a bit. Not really a huge fan of it. A Zing Zap flinch chance is nice though, for making a comeback in the game. But let's talk about everyone's probably least favorite Pokemon in this format, Pheromosa. So what makes Pheromosa good? Now, before we can get into Pheromosa, I think we should look at the stats that Pheromosa has. The fact that it has these incredible attack and speed stats. Look at this. 137 physical attack, 137 special attack, 151 speed. That is extremely fast. This Pokemon is able to outspeed Tapu Koko even with a neutral nature for speed. So you could run like Adamant, Naughty, whatever you want, and the fact that you will be able to still outspeed Tapu Koko and just do so much damage is incredible. The fact is pretty much one of the only relevant fighting types in the game. There are only, like, as I said, Hariyama, Buzzwole, Pheromosa. Those are pretty much the only ones you don't see Como. Yeah, for my knowledge, I think these are like the only 3 relevant fighting types. But the fact that it's so fast, so it can get a very strong hit up and a KO first turn, and the fact that a lot of people like to run Fighting Z on this, which gives it a very powerful Z move, whether it's high jump kick or focus blast, just able to pick up and knock out so many Pokemon. Life Orb is a decently common set. Choice Band is also something that's been seen, but also there was like Quiver that Sash if you were like old time or Choreo sets. But the fact that this Pokemon gets so many good moves, let me break down some of the good moves. It gets, well, Bug Buzz, it gets Ice Beam, it gets High Jump Kick obviously for the damage. Lunge, which is okay, I guess. Poison Jab for the Tapus. U-turn, which is very nice for momentum. But Focus Blast, obviously, if you want to run the full special set, and if you don't want to miss, because people have used the Focus Blast set just because it's justifiable, because Pheromosa is usually going to die in 1 or 2 turns. So you can just get the Z move off, and then you don't have to worry about hitting a Focus Blast most of the time. But, and also it's probably less riskier than hitting High Jump Kick, even though, like, if you miss, you don't lose 50% of your health. So that's pretty much what I want to say about Pheromosa. The fact it just does so much damage, and yeah, it's just a Pokemon that just forces a lot of 50-50s usually, and Pheromosa is just pretty good against a lot of teams. Fake PG, Pheromosa can do a lot of work against Fake PG. It can do a lot of work against a trend we're going to see later when I do the June analysis of Nihilego, Tapu Bulu, and Arcanine. This Pokemon can do a lot of damage. Actually, it's been a core for a while, that core, but we're seeing it rise again in June. But I will cover that when I do the June analysis, along with the International Championship for America analysis. So that's all I want to say about these Pokemon. I think these are the 3 Pokemon that really stand out to me. And now let's talk about the final thing, which is going to be what I think is probably going to be more relevant for the future meta, for what's going to be coming up. Alright, let's talk about what I personally think will be good upcoming for the future. So first, I want to talk about Muck, and I think Muck is one of those Pokemon that kind of fell and dropped in usage for the past few months. We haven't really seen many Mucks, but the fact that Muck is currently really good right now, in my opinion, with the drop of Garchomp, which, you know, Muck only has, well, Muck Alola form only has 1 weakness in Ground type. The fact that Garchomp is really dropping usage, other than pretty much Toler's team, the fact that Muck can kind of run rabid, of course Gluttony with the Figgy Berry or whatever berry you want to run, with a very decent bulk. I mean, high HP, high attack, kind of mediocre defense, high special defense. The fact that this Pokemon just handles so much of what is coming right now. Tapu Fini, Tapu Koko, Tapu Lele, Tapu Bulu, all Tapus are threatened by Muck. You can knock off Porygon 2's item, which is a great thing. You could run either Poison Jab or Gunk Shot. I think both are justifiable in this format. Gunk Shot hits a lot of Pokemon for good damage at neutral if they're trying to switch in, which makes sense. And you know, Poison Jab always that accurate move, so that's fine. But the fact that Muck also gets, you know, moves like Flamethrower, Imprison, Taunt, I guess you could run Memento, which would be interesting. Clear Smog, which is justifiable. I don't disable, I guess. I don't know. Pursuit, maybe. Shadow Sneak is still kind of used. I could even see like Toxic Muck, to be honest, but I think Muck has a lot of options. It can do really well against Tapus, as well as, you know, the fact that knocking off a berry or item is just so huge. If you knock off Snorlax, that's a lot of recovery, a lot of time you don't have to spend. Knock off a Porygon 2's Eviolite is huge. Knock off an Arcanine's berry could make the difference in the end game. There's a lot of reasons why Muck is so good, I think, right now. Although Gigalith is like the one Pokemon I'm going to say that Muck is probably the worst choice you want to see against. I think that Muck can do really well, especially if you build it around a team that can handle Gigalith solidly. Next, let's talk about Mudsdale. And I think Mudsdale is a very, very underrated Pokemon in general. We have seen some usages of Mudsdale, but the fact that, one, look at Mudsdale's stats. It is a very bulky Pokemon. 100, 185. That is pretty good, especially with that Assault Vest item. Covering its lower special defense makes it a way tankier Pokemon. High attack stat. Look at that. Base 125. I mean, low speed, but that's kind of manageable, especially when you're able to take hits very well. Stamina is a great ability that increases defense every time it gets hit, which is incredible. The fact that Mudsdale can run pretty much only two items I've seen are Assault Vest and Ground DMZ, but the fact that it has those options are really nice. The fact you can pick up a simple strong attack, I mean, it gets really good coverage moves, a high horsepower, close combat, Earthquake, Heavy Slam for like Tapu Lele's, Rock Slide, which could be good against like Gyarados or something. Yeah, it's just, I think, a very solid Pokemon in general. I think Mudsdale is kind of underused right now. It even gets some speed control options in Bulldoze, Rock Tomb, and Low Sweep. So it's got options, and I think Mudsdale, with Gigalith being so popular right now, and you know, Tapu Koko, Togedemaru as well, it can take a hit from Tapu Lele and fire off a Heavy Slam for the KO. I think Mudsdale is a very underrated Pokemon right now, and although Kartana and Fini are still popular, those Pokemon are manageable, and I think Mudsdale can handle a lot. I mean, it's one of the most effective Pokemon against like Garchomp, Tapu Koko lead, because you're pretty much always able to live those combination attacks and probably pick up a knockout on Tapu Koko, or just do a lot of damage to Garchomp. So I think it's a very solid Pokemon, and I feel like it's been very underrated recently. Hariyama. I want to talk about Hariyama, and I feel like Hariyama is a very, very, very underrated Pokemon. It fell in usage, kind of. You know, we did see an international championship. Alex Gomez and Wolfglick both used Hariyama, I believe. Not international challenge, international championship. I think it was Australia where they used it. But Hariyama, let's talk about this Pokemon. A fighting type, which is, you know, fighting types, they're rare in this format. Like, really good fighting types. Hariyama is one of those 3 Pokemon that can actually do a lot of work. It's has an extremely high base HP stat. In fact, when you make it level 50, the fact that with no investment you have a 219 HP stat is just incredible. It's just incredible. Very, very poor defenses, however, but the fact that you can make that up with things such as Intimidate and the item Assault Vest just make up for it. Low speed but high attack power. And the fact that Hariyama I think it's just my favorite set would probably be the Assault Vest currently. That's what I've been testing personally. But you could always go Guts, Flame Orb as well. But no matter what, this Pokemon's still going to be doing a lot to your opponent's team. The fact that it gets close combat to hit the Gigalith and Porygon 2. Assault Vest set, you're able to wall both of those Pokemon and do a lot of damage. The fact that Hariyama is pretty much the Pokemon that can handle those two Pokemon and scare out Trick Room. It gets fake out pressure, which is nice on setups. It gets, you know, pretty much a lot of interesting moves. Bulldoze is common as a setup move. There's Knockoff, which, you know, Knockoff that Porygon 2's item. Knockoff Berry or Violet. As I said, Knockoff is just such a good move and it's really underrated. I mean, it's really highly needed in this format. The fact that we have very limited knockoff uses, so I think Hariyama having knockoff is great. Poison Jab is very handy for handling Tapu Bulu, as well as 2 shiny most Tapus, 3 in Tapu Fini's case. Don't think rock coverage is necessary, but you could run that. And Heavy Slam, you know, for Lele is understandable. Bulldoze, as I said, for like Joshua Lorsi that support Hariyama. But I think it's just a Pokemon that, you know, a lot of people haven't been using or testing a lot. Feint, obviously, you know, to help basically break through protects and get your attacks off. And yeah, I think Hariyama is extremely underrated, and I think it can go really far in the upcoming international championship for the US. So the last thing I want to talk about is Pelipper Golduck, and now I think Rain is gonna be big. I think Rain should be big, and the fact that even though it wasn't in this month's coverage, in June, which actually it's actually today, Japan Nationals, Pelipper Golduck, it won. Rain won Japan Nationals, so I think Rain is gonna be something that should have been used more, because yes, although Gigalith's a bit harder to deal with because of Rain, because Gigalith is slower than Pelipper Golduck, so you could lead it, and the fact you don't have your Swift Swim. I think if you play really smart or build a really smart team with Pelipper Golduck, I think it can go really far. The fact that, you know, it's made top 8 at every international championship thanks to Tommy, just the fact, it just puts on so much pressure. Hydro Vortex from Golduck and Rain does so much damage. Encore, of course, if you protect, then you're risking the Encore. Pelipper is the few Pokemon that get Tailwind in this format, which speed control is always really nice. Hurricane and Scald, Brine do so much damage. It's just, I think, very reliable combo, and I think these two have the keys to go really far in the format. But I think that's all I want to say about the April and May metagame as I see it. Hope everyone enjoyed. Tell me what you want to see. I tried to make this as short as possible. Of course, it's 53 minutes, but there was a lot to cover, and I'm sorry this was late once again. I have been extremely busy, but I do hope everyone did enjoy, and let me know what you want to see for the June one. If you want to see the, well, technically the international championship for the United States is on June 30th, so I might count it toward June. But otherwise, let me know what you want to see. I will be bringing these videos more consistently. I'm hoping to get the June one up probably the week after the second week of July, because of the fact that I'll be playing and traveling the first weekend of July. So let me know what you people want to see. And thank you for being patient, and I'll see you around in another video.